Alright, I've got a quick game for you. Made a lot of long videos recently, so this one should go and be the opposite. This is the version of Oloro that I'm using. The main change is that, as I pointed out in my last video, I've removed mental misstep and I put in a prairie stream for consistency. And there's this one game in particular that I wanted to go over. And the reason I'm going over this game is that it was just one of those games where it's a blue on blue battle, and it was just I had a good feeling at the end of the game. I was like really happy that everything played out the way that I had hoped. So anyway, my opponent's playing Krufix, and when I see Krufix, that tells me he's almost certainly in a big mana type of deck where he's using green to ramp and blue to draw and protect his bombs, his haymakers. As opposed to if I saw Edric, where it would be like a swarm of small guys with blue mana to disrupt. So, and he wins the dice roll, I think. So yeah, we'll just leave his commander up there. Krufix hanging out over in the corner. And so yeah, we'll kick this off. So this was kind of neat. I drew Wasteland, and because he has a fetch in play, you would think playing Wasteland here doesn't make sense. It should preordain. The longer I wait on preordain, the better my decision making will be with the card, or should be, because I'll have more information. I'd like to preordain early, but even so, but because my hand is already very good. But what playing the Wasteland does here is it threatens him. This is a case where the threat of violence is more valuable than the actual act of violence. Using the Wasteland will even us on mana, but at 0 and 0 apiece if he were to fetch a dual land. But threatening to use the Wasteland just by playing it means that he may not want to go even on mana base, and he may decide that he would rather fetch a land that is not susceptible to Wasteland. But if you look at Wooded Foothills, the only option he has for lands that isn't susceptible to Wasteland is a basic forest. And if he does fetch a basic forest with his Wooded Foothills, then he's not fetching a blue source. And I wouldn't really want to Wasteland a land that isn't blue anyway. So that effectively, from my perspective, just threatening with this Wasteland, if he goes and gets a basic forest, it's almost like I've destroyed an island without actually activating the Wasteland, because I've destroyed his access to one blue. And I get to still save the Wasteland and attack whatever dual land he does get later. Well, as it turns out, he doesn't fetch, but he plays another fetch land, and he's kind of in the same pickle. His choices now are to fetch 2 dual lands and let me kill the tropical island. He can fetch Trop Breeding Pool and I'll kill the Trop. Or he can fetch basic island, basic forest. In which case, he's missing out on having a land that produces an extra green and a land that produces an extra blue. So this will have suppressed both a green and a blue just by sitting there threatening him. And again, it's still useful whenever I decide to use it. So I make a small misplay here. I should have actually played Hallowed Fountain and said go, and I played Scalding Tarn. And I'll explain why that's a misplay in a moment. He plays a basic island. Oh, what I do is I end of turn here. I'm not really worried if he has Vendilion Click, because he'll be kind of in a... Because I've got Preordained to find like more counters and stuff, and if he has Click, he's going to have to probably take Shackles actually, so... plus, again, it doesn't fit his deck, but I mean, Click can go in any deck, so you always got to respect it. Anyway, the correct card for me to go get here is actually Watery Grave, but because I added the Prairie Stream to the deck, and I'm like all excited about how I can go get it, and I won't draw it and have to play it tapped. I go get it, which is wrong because I already have white. I don't need. I mean, 2 white is good because I have Humility in the deck, but it was incorrect for me to do that in this situation. You don't, fetch a second white when I don't even have a black. And I pay for it when I preordain this turn. And see, look at this, Demonic Tutor and Vindicate. 2 cards now I can't cast. So I decide I'm going to have to ship them both. And shipping a Demonic Tutor is real painful. It does find me a black, but I just traded a Demonic Tutor for a Marsh Flats. Sucks pretty bad, actually. So my opponent's still like worried about how I'm going to use the Wasteland play, so I go ahead and just I'm gonna leave it there, and I'm gonna go ahead. I'm gonna leave it untapped and use a blue instead for the expedition map because of the mana leak that I've got. And I play Marsh Flats so that I can at least fix the black mana problem. And things work out exactly as we'd hoped. Just having the Wasteland in play, he's down 2 dual lands. He should have blue, 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 green, 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 and a total of 4 mana right now. And if he did, and I stripped one of his dual lands, so what? He'd still have blue, blue, green, green, and 3 mana total. But because he's so concerned about Wasteland targeting his mana, he's made it easier for me to push back against his blue. And normally, at this point in the game, I would, so end of turn I fetch Water Grave. Normally at this point with Expedition Map, I would fetch, well, I'm going to fetch Strip Mine, but I would Strip Mine a forest, actually, if the other forest was a dual land. So I guess in this sense, his play works out, because I could have cut him off from a color. As much as I prefer to attack blue mana, if you can shut off an entire color, you do that. But because I'm kind of low on counter magic. I've only got to 1. I still want to restrict his access to blue, so decide keeping him at. He wasn't able to do anything with blue, blue, green, green before, so let's keep it that way. But I don't use a strip mine, and this is key. I don't use strip mine on my turn. So there's no difference between using a strip mine at the end of my turn or during my main phase and using one on his turn. Except if I use it on my turn and he decides to tap it in response, then I've got to fight a counter war with him, and I have one less land in play because he'll be making his plays in response. And so I don't want to fight a counter war with one less mana in play. So I'm not going to use it on my turn. And I see people do that all the time. I think it's totally wrong. Now that said, if I don't use it on my turn and he makes a play at the end of my turn, then I can fight a counter war if I want to. And after that counter war is resolved, if the strip mine has not been tapped, it would be correct to immediately kill a land before he gets to untap and have access to it. So that's a different thing. But if you're going to use a strip mine, don't strip mine your opponent's lands on your own turn. And allow them to use it to cast spells against you on your turn with the land that you just killed. Wait to see what they do. Because if you strip mine like I just did during his upkeep, look what happens. Look how much better this turns out. He actually does have a play in response, and his play is Venser. And if I had used strip mine on my turn, and then mana leaked his Venser, which is the play I'm making now, then on his turn he would have access to all of his mana. Because I did it during his upkeep, I'm venturing to mana leak it so that he doesn't bounce the land that I'm targeting and then replay it for the turn. Because I'm doing it during his upkeep, he won't have access to any of that mana. And I'm not getting just completely wrecked here by whatever it is that he wants to resolve, which would probably be his commander. So anyway, back to the game. He plays his Yavimaya Coast, and I was pretty happy because I figured, okay, I got a wasteland target. Continue blue suppression. But then he plays 3 visits. Of course, if I was him, I would have got a dual land at this point. Having 2 duels, only 1 to kill. I mean, at that point, it makes perfect sense. But he doesn't. He gets a basic forest. Now, there's no need for me to strip at the end of his turn right there because his land isn't going to magically untap on my turn. And I might have something to do with my wasteland. That's the other thing I see people do. You don't wasteland a tap land until right before it untaps. You don't wasteland an untap land until their upkeep. So or at their end step, if you know for sure, I mean, proper use of wasteland is like something that I see people, I've never really covered it myself, but I see people make mistakes with. You can do it during somebody's begin of combat in order to prevent them from getting the mana during their main. You can do it during their upkeep to prevent them from getting it for their turn. And you should do it during their end step in order to prevent them from having the mana on your turn. Other than that, in general, it's best to wait. And as it turns out, I'm by not being knee-jerk reaction and just killing this as soon as I can. After I draw my card, I realize I have a much better play anyway, and I fetch myself a Winter Orb and basically wasteland all 5 lands. And the reason I got Orb here, even though I don't have artifact advantage, is that I'm expecting to, because I've got land drops to hit and artifacts to play. So I go ahead and untap Tundra, and then what a lucky draw. I get myself a Mana Crypt, which allows me to play Talisman right away. And I could slam a Power Stone here, but it doesn't make sense to me. I would rather play it off of a Crypt and a Talisman next turn. So as opposed to tapping 2 lands, it won't untap. Especially since one of them is a Colosseum, and I have Threshold, so I can use the Colosseum, and I would prefer to have flexibility. And I'm pretty glad I made that choice, because look at his next turn. He's got Garruk. If I were to fetch sack the Colosseum in response to Garruk, and I found myself a Spell Pierce here, I would not be able to pierce Garruk and counter it, because he's got 2 mana untapped, so I have no response to that. Which is really unfortunate, and it's only because he had a temple to play him that that was the case. But now he's got even more mana, and he plays Coercive Portal. Now this, I could Spell Pierce in response. I should have activated the Colosseum in response to the Coercive Portal, because I'm planning to use the Colosseum anyway, because this hand is great if nothing's going on for developing, but it's not great when my opponent's threatens to have both mana advantage from Garruk and card advantage from Portal. I've got to get back in this game. So I should have responded with Colosseum and tried to get a Pierce and then just pierce that. I did not, however. I still am planning to use Colosseum. I see these 3 cards here now. Island and Shackles aren't looking too useful. He might be playing green, but I mean, I've had Shackles for the whole game, and I haven't had a single target. I'm not planning to keep that. So the only question here is, do I keep a Mana Source, War Power Stone that's good under the Orb, or do I keep one of my counter and dig cards? I decide that because he's already got the advantage, counter and dig is what I need. Counter to keep myself from getting further behind, or to ram through my solution cards to his threats, and dig to find them. So I go ahead and untap Wasteland here, because I don't want him to untap the Temple, and then I don't want him to untap it either for his untap phase or with his Garruk. So knowing that he's respected the Wasteland the whole game, I'm going to threaten him with it to try to get him to untap a worse land. I luck into a Force of Will, but I'm not going to main phase Impulse, because I'm hoping that if I need to, I can cast if he casts a spell next turn, I can cast myself a Remand using Talisman and Crypt. I'll have 1 floating, and then I can Impulse afterwards, and that'll get me 5 cards deep. So I'm not going to Impulse main phase, and then I won't have the ability to play Remand without using 2 untapped lands. It won't untap afterwards for the Orb. Doesn't make sense there. So I'm going to have to wait a turn. But what that means is that I'm not, of course, theoretically, I could have Impulsed main phase and found myself at Disenchant, prevented him from drawing this card, but do I really want to bank on that, then that's not my best play? The answer is no, so I have to let him have an extra card. He does respect the Wasteland, does not untap Temple, which is really nice here. Uses his Garruk, and likewise does not untap the Temple, so Wasteland is again killing the Temple without actually having to kill anything. He makes no play, so I'm going to Impulse end of turn. And there is a seal. I could have prevented him from getting that extra card. It sucks. But that was still the right play, I think. The only other option for me in those 4 cards, Terminus, useless, more mana, not important. The only other option, I could have taken Metamorph and just cloned his Portal here and tried to beat him, thinking that my draws would be better than his draws. The problem is, if I copy his Portal, he's going to get access to drawing 2 before I do. He's going to draw 1 during his next turn, which means that when he draws 2, he could draw a Disenchant and a Counterspell. Kill my Portal, protect his removal spell against my counters, and then I lose the game. So I don't want him to get a card first. I want to take the Seal of Cleansing. I just want to kill this right now, and then I don't have to deal with that always being a turn behind in terms of cards. It's not good. So I go ahead and clear my main phase out, because he doesn't need to know whether or not I have a mana drain in my hand. Seal resolves, so I was thinking that I would play Seal here, and if he had a counterspell, I would remand it back to my hand with the Talisman, and then replay it off Tundra and Wasteland, and then kill his thing anyway, and have Force of Will backing that play up. But he didn't have a counterspell for the Seal, so that's great. I go ahead and just play the Scroll Rack, because I might as well use the mana in my pool, and it's available to me. Since he didn't have a play there, I'll just hope he doesn't do anything too crazy on this turn. Plays Kodama's Reach. That is not my definition of too crazy, so I just let that go. And I draw Tezzeret. Now, the problem here is, well, not problem, but the situation here is that I could play Tezzeret. Let's go to my main phase. Let's get over to the main phase. Okay, I can play Tezzeret here, but if I do, 2, 3, 4, 5, I'd only have 1 mana untapped. Well, whatever land I decide to leave untapped. Which means if he counters, I have to Force a Will in order to resolve Tezzeret. But he's got 4 blue, so he could counter twice. Which means he would counter Tezzeret, counter my counter, and then I lose the game. So I'm not going to cast Tezzeret into 4 blue. I'm just going to say go. Hopefully he'll tap some mana on his turn, and I'll win that counter war, and then I can resolve Tezzeret on the next turn. He's not really putting me under a lot of pressure here, because the Winter Orb is incentivizing him to use Garruk to untap lands as opposed to producing beasts. If he decides to change gears and produce a beast and not untap extra lands, well, then next turn I'll untap a blue, and at that point I can cast Tezzeret with 2 mana untapped, which means I can cast Tezzeret and have a Stoic Rebuttal and have a Force of Will and actually win a counter war, and that does change the math. So even if he changes modes on Garruk, I can still make the same play. But he plays the Temple, puts a card on top, which is not always the best thing, and then decides that he's going to actually untap a land that gives me. Well, he's tried his best to dance around Wasteland, but at this point he untaps Temple because he just doesn't have any other Wasteland-proof lands. I'm not going to kill his land end of turn here, but I'm gonna hang on to it because of like exactly what I said. Now I can play Tezzeret with multiple counters backing it up. But I am going to Skorak end of turn. I figured I'd dump 2 cards. I temporarily dump Tezzeret, and I would throw away Stoic. And then if he had, if Skorak resolves and he makes a play at the end of my, after it resolves, I can remand the play back to his hand, which will draw the Stoic. And then I'll have Force of Will and Stoic together in my hand, and I can draw Tezzeret for my turn, and I'm in no worse position at that point. But he'll have more mana tapped. Meanwhile, if he does nothing, I get to look at 2 new cards and draw my best potential card next turn. So, in response, though, to Scroll Rack, he doesn't let it resolve. He responds to the rack effect itself. He goes for a play, a 5 mana spell, actually, Teferi, which taps a bunch of his blue, which is fantastic. So, Teferi's a card I don't want to remand back to his hand because I don't want to have to fight over it multiple times. I just don't want it to resolve ever. So I decided that I'm going to go ahead and just Stoic. The other reason I'm Stoicing the Teferi here is that if he has a counterspell, I have a mana floating from the Crypt. So I'll spend a blue and remand my Stoic back to my hand, drawing potentially another blue card that I can Force a Will with. But if I don't draw another blue card, I've just put Stoic back into my hand. And so, if he has a counterspell here and I remand Stoic back to my hand, I can force with the Stoic. But I'll have converted the remand into a card, and then I'll draw a card for my turn, and I'll be quite a bit deeper into my library, which will give me more options. I like that play a lot. So if he counters, that's why I run the Stoic out. And but as it happens, he doesn't have a counterspell, so that's fine. Instead, he's got Claim, and I actually don't. I look at it for a minute. I'm like, I can force to protect the claim, but Winter Orb against a guy who's got Garruk and a Temple of the False Gods is not doing enough, and it is kind of actually hurting me a little bit. Not a lot, but it's almost like I have no advantage and he has no advantage, and I don't like, I'm not going to fight to protect a permanent that's a break-even permanent. He's only got 1 card in his hand, so if I waste a Force of Will on this thing, then I don't have an answer for his 1 card in hand. But if I keep a Force of Will in my hand, whatever his card is, the one that he wants all this mana for, I'm just going to force it, and I'll be good to go. So I'm not going to fight over this. I let him go ahead and claim. It does change how many cards I plan to use with Scroll Rack, though, because I was going to Scroll Rack for 2, but now that I know that my next best play for the turn is going to be Tezzeret backed up by Force of Will, I need all 3 cards in my hand. So I just Scroll Rack for 1, thinking that if he has one more instant, I'll remand Tezzeret back into my hand. He doesn't. So I get to untap everything, though, and like I said, he left the strippable or the wastable temple untapped. So if the last card in his hand is actually counterspell and not a big haymaker like I thought, I go ahead. I don't want to have to fight over it, over my Tezzeret, so I go ahead and just waste his blue, and then he doesn't float mana, so I don't have to declare an attack step in order to clear his pool, and I go ahead and cast Tezzeret. Now at this point, I have to figure out what to get, and I had been planning here. I was going to go get Well of Lost Dreams, because we're both pretty much out of gas. He's going to make one big play next turn. I'm going to counter it. I mean, I assume, and then I will refill my hand quickly with Well of Lost Dreams, and with Scroll Rack I can see so many cards that I'll just bury him. On the other hand, if the card in his hand is Counterspell, and I prevented him from playing it by making the Strip Mine, then in that case he may not have any good play next turn, and then drawing extra cards off the well is also going to bury him, because it'll allow me to play threats and then counter his counter using these. So either way, it seemed like the card to get, but since I know that I'm not going to play Remand, that I'm using it for Force of Will, because he's got so much mana that almost anything he plays, if I were to Remand it, he would just replay it. And, you know, if I didn't draw a blue spell off the Remand, then I'm totally screwed. So because of that, I know that I'm going to force with Remand. I'm not going to cast it. And because I'm not going to cast it, that means that I can tap more mana. I don't need to leave 2 mana untapped. And a Godless Shrine in my hand is basically useless at this point. So I decide I'm going to Scroll Rack instead. And I do not know what compelled me to select activating with black over white, but I decide to do it, and I get rewarded so heavily by making that choice. I Scroll Rack away the Godless Shrine, and look what I find. I mean, man, there just couldn't be a more perfect card in this situation with exactly 1 white mana untapped. Oh, now I do remember why I chose to do that. I chose to do that, I'm sorry, I chose to use the black mana because I hadn't activated Teferi yet. And so if I used the black mana and my next card was Vampire Tutor or something, or Confidant, I could Teferi the Talisman and go get black. In reality, if it had been, in reality, if I'd used the white and it was land tax, I could have fetched up a Talisman and played it that way. But I wanted to, you know, again, I was thinking Teferi was gonna search for 4. Now, because I found the land tax, I have a tremendous card drawing engine. I don't need to go get well right away. I would prefer not to kill my Teferi. I keep saying Teferi, my Tezzeret. I prefer not to kill my Tezzeret if I don't have to. So instead of -4ing, I'm going to go ahead and plus him up this turn with the intention of -4ing him on the next turn. So I plus him up. Oh, right. So let me back up. Let me backpedal. Sorry. I was planning to do that. I was going to plus him up. I was going to untap Talisman and Crypt. But it's the same issue. It's the Remand issue. If I untap Talisman and Crypt, the only thing I can be doing with them is casting Remand. And I know the next card is a card I don't want. It's the stupid land that I just put, the Godless Shrine. So that doesn't make any sense. Luckily, I was thinking during the game better than I am right now. What I did was, all right. So this was the thinking. I'm expecting his card to be whatever the big bomb is the kind of card you would play in a deck that's running Crewfix. He's been unable to play all game because of the Winter Orb, and he fought and fought in order to get the orb off the table. So I'm expecting a big bomb to come down. So what are the kind of cards that might be played in green-blue? Well, one of the cards I've seen most commonly is actually Eldrazi. And so the reason I fetched Crucible and Strip Mined his Temple is that I was looking at what kind of Eldrazi could he have. If I left him with the Temple, he would have access to 2 2 and 4 and 4. So 10 plus Temple is 12 plus Garruk 13, 14, and then 1 is 15. He could actually cast Emrakul. He would get the extra turn. I could force the Emrakul, but it could turn out very badly for me because it would actually get shuffled back into his deck. And there's a chance he could literally draw it again on the next turn or something else. Giving him a time walk is not good. So by stripping his Temple, now he can't cast Emrakul. So now out of the Eldrazi that are left, 1, 2, so he's got 4, 8, 10, 11, 12 mana. He could cast Kozilek, but it'll tap him out completely. And remember, I strip mined a blue source before I cast Tezzeret. So it's possible he doesn't have, Emrakul or Kozilek or something like that. It's possible he's got a counterspell in his hand. So if he is holding a counterspell and he top decks Kozilek, for example, by killing his Temple here, he won't be able to play an Eldrazi and cast the counterspell. So since I didn't know what he's got and what his bombs are, whether or not he's holding a bomb and he draws a counter, or he's holding a counter and he draws a bomb, either way, I don't want him to be able to do both because I only have one counterspell on my side. I need him to just do like a haymaker play and say, and then get it countered and then say go. So that's why Tezzeret fetched Crucible and Crucible strip, and then I immediately strip mined his Temple right now. I had to work out like what's the best way for me to not lose, and that was the whole thinking that I put into that turn. As it turns out, my opponent draws and plays a land, and he does have a haymaker. It is a game-ending Praetor's Council, and I say game-ending because that would actually return tons of lands. Corrosive Portal goes back to his hand. Teferi goes back to his hand. Venser goes back to his hand, and a Scry land goes back to his hand. So he wouldn't get to do as much with it this turn, but on his next turn, he would be able to win the game, I think, pretty quickly if that were to resolve. Clearly, I'm going to force Sewell. He has no cards in hand, so there's no tricks here. This is just flat out exactly what I wanted to happen. And this is what we played the game for. The whole game was about setting this exact situation up so that I could make the exact play that I just made. And in the face of that, my opponent scoops. And you wonder, like, well, why does he scoop? Well, I think it makes sense for him to give up here. He could have made a beast to threaten Tezzeret, but let's look at what happens if he does that. If he does, even with a hand with no hand in play, and just the permanents I've got, I would tax for 3 cards, 3 lands. So let's not really. The quantity is important, but the usefulness of them is dubious. So I get 3 lands plus a draw. So the draw is a card that could affect the game. So I've seen at this point 1 card that could affect the game. Then I activate Mana Crypt for 2. I spend 1 of it for Scroll Rack. I have 1 floating, and I Scroll Rack for 4. So now I had seen 1 card that could affect the game, and I get 4 new ones. So I've seen 5 cards that could affect the game at this point. If none of them are good, I play a fetch land from the graveyard, and then I activate it and put a land into play and shuffle my deck. Then I use Tezzeret to untap Mana Crypt and Scroll Rack. Then I use the 1 mana floating to activate Scroll Rack and put 4 cards in my hand back and look at 4 new cards. At this point I've seen 9 new cards. I also have, at this point, 5 untapped lands, a Mana Crypt, and a Talisman, for a total of 8 mana, which means I can cast my commander and have a counterspell ready to go, which means he won't be able to attack Tezzeret at that point. But the bottom line is, next turn, for effectively 0 mana, after all said and done, none of my permanents are tapped. I've just used my Planeswalker's ability and a fetch land. So for 0 mana, I basically get to cast a Dig Through Time that says, look at the top 9 cards of your library, put 4 of them into your hand. I don't think that's beatable. He didn't think it was beatable, and he gave up. So that was it. I thought it was a cool game. I hope that you appreciated the game as well, or if you didn't appreciate it, I hope that you enjoyed watching it. It was just one of those games where it's like, this is
it's one of those games where you just like you get the read on your opponent, you figure out what kind of ways they can win, what you can allow and what you have to fight over, and it, I guess I just hate the idea that and I've seen it in Wizards of the Coast articles, which really frustrates me, where people are talking about like commander decks with blue, where the idea is that you just counter everything they do. And as you can see, like that's clearly not the case. I didn't counter Garruk. I didn't counter. I didn't counter his artifact that drew him extra cards. I didn't counter his destruction of my Winter Orb. In some cases because I couldn't. In other cases because I chose not to. Um, uh, it, it's not how Blues played when Blues played correctly, in my opinion. Um, but I think using counter spells like a scalpel as opposed to a blunt for a hammer is what makes the most sense. You just precision slice out the cards that will allow them to win, or the cards that will prevent you from winning when you have an imminent win, and the rest you just you just let it go. You just say, well, does this matter in the long run? If the answer is no, then you don't counter in general. So, and I hope that game was illustrated with that. Anyway, that's all I've got. I appreciate you watching. Hope you enjoyed the video, and see you next time.